Good morning. It's great to see everybody. Thank you all for being here to honor and celebrate the life of former State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Delane Easton. And it's wonderful to see so many familiar faces in the room. And I know that we have a lot of friends and colleagues joining us on Zoom as well. So thank you. I'm Dina Fong, and I think I might be the longest serving Easton staff member who is still at the California Department of Education. I've survived. I've had the pleasure of being in, I think, 4 administrations. So I started working for Delane at the state capitol when I was, as she would call me, a young pup, and pretty much grew up with her. I joined the CDE after she won her election to become the first and only woman to serve as state superintendent. Yes. I would like to acknowledge a few distinguished guests with us here today. The Honorable State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond. The Honorable former State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Jack O'Connell. And last but not least, the Honorable former State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tom Torlakson. And it is rare and such a treat to have 3 state superintendents with us today. So thank you so much for being here. And I'd also like to acknowledge our Chief Deputy, Mary Nicely, and members of the CDE executive and leadership team. Thank you for being here, as well as special friends and colleagues of Delane. For me, the opportunity to work for Delane was an unexpected gift from God. I didn't apply for the position, and her office reached out to me to interview as her scheduler in the state capitol, and the rest is history. There's so much to say about her, but I'll share a few quick things. Thanks to Delane, I became proficient at directions and maps since she drove herself to events during our Capitol era. This was the days before the luxury of Google Maps. She sometimes got lost and would call me from the road saying she missed the exit and had me try to help her when I was miles away and she was driving 65 miles an hour on the freeway. This was honestly one of the most stressful parts of my job. I was so thankful we had our CHP Protective Services officer to drive her at CDE and never had to deal with giving her directions again. Thanks to Delane, I can name all 58 counties in California and improved my geography immensely because she wanted to visit a school in all 58 counties and achieve that goal and more. One of the fun parts of my job was to schedule those school visits and field trips to all the counties. Thanks to Delane, I've had an exciting career as a member of the Easton team and to witness all the amazing things she's done for education and met interesting people and made lifelong friends and colleagues along the way. She could be a tough person to work for, but I can truly say that I loved my job. I was trained well and learned a lot. She was fierce and an outstanding speaker, but she was also a person of great integrity and character with a big heart and always wanted to do what's best for the children. She built a wonderful team and we became a family. I'm happy we stayed in touch over the years, and I'll cherish the memories. And thankful she hired me so many years ago. So I would like to especially thank State Superintendent Thurmond because it was his idea to host a CDE memorial in remembrance of Delane. So thank you, Superintendent Thurmond. Thanks for giving us this opportunity to share and remember her. And it's my pleasure to introduce you as our opening speaker. As California's 28th State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond leads the nation's largest public school system. In his second term as the leader of the California's education system, Superintendent Thurmond has tripled the amount of per pupil funding from a decade ago. He has focused these investments on transforming California's public schools to make sure that every child has access to healthy school meals, universal preschool, mental health supports at school, and high-quality instruction in literacy and math. Superintendent Thurman's leadership is shaped by his on-the-ground expertise as an educator and a social worker who has served Californians for more than 18 years in elected office. His change-making approach to policy is also rooted in his lived experience. As a child, his family was lifted out of poverty thanks to public assistance and a high-quality public education. So please join me in welcoming State Superintendent Tony Thurman.
Good morning. You know, I loved everything that Dina said, but I especially loved when Dina was telling stories about Delane and the directions and going 65 miles an hour. I thought it was a parallel to what the job is, that you're always trying to get direction and you're going at full speed. But really, today's event would not be possible without folks like Jenna Anderson and Dina Fong. Can we have another round of applause for Dina Fong for your special dedication to Delane and to all of the state superintendents in the room. We've all had the honor to work with you. Raise your hand if you knew Delane, like you knew Delane. You all, and you all raise your hand too, I love it. You all are Delane's family. You all are Delane's loved ones. The way I knew Delane was almost always about the work, with the kind of intensity and urgency that the work in education demands and needs. And I am appreciative that you all are here to remember Delane. And we will continue to remember Delane because she lifted the bar high when it came to education. Her focus on smaller class sizes, her focus on preschool and all the benefits that we know come with that, her focus on opening doors and shattering glass ceilings for everyone, including women in politics and in public service and in leadership. She lived it. She lived it with intention. Most of my conversations with Delane were during the pandemic. And she talked a lot about, you know, later in her career, she worked on a lot of STEAM-related programs. And she talked a lot about STEAM. I mean, my goodness, we walked into the pandemic and we've discovered that there are a million students who don't have a computer or access to high-speed internet. There should never be a digital divide in our state. And Delane talked about, in that moment, the importance of technology and how we must make sure that every student has access to it. And so she was talking about equity. She was talking about making sure that everyone would have the same chances that many of us have had, that regardless of how our lives began, that we have a chance at a great life. And in many times, and in many cases, that starts with getting a first-rate education. And so it is a tremendous loss because she was a leader for many things. She's a leader of leaders. But I hope that we will all continue to celebrate Delane. You are all part of her legacy. And so raise your right hand so I can swear you in. I know you don't need to be sworn in to continue celebrating Delane Easton, but I hope that you will. In this space, wherever you work or wherever you serve, wherever you live, whoever you love, make sure that hers is a name that is continually uplifted for the great work that she led and that she did. You all know public service is hard. And thank you, all of you, for your public service. I wonder what Delane would say about today, not this program. Well, about today, she'd say, well, wait, why didn't you put this picture in? Or why didn't you put that program? Because she is always focused on the details. But what would she say about the time that we live in right now, when there's so much hate and polarization? Instead of saying, how do we come together on behalf of the children? Superintendents, I never knew that education would be the most politicized field to ever work in. I thought it was hard as a school board member when people only showed up when there was discussion about school closures, and when you were doing good things, you could hear crickets in the chamber. Mary was there, our chief deputy was there. She knows, I mean, this work is so hard. Delane would be standing tall again. She would be saying that we don't support book bans or forced outings of our LGBTQ plus kids. She'd be standing up for California kids against anyone who tried to hurt them or take away from their experience, because that's in her fabric. Delane is someone who champions and stands up and fights and dreams and visions. I love, 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 love that she created what we celebrate now as the California Teacher of the Year ceremony, and the foundation that recognizes teachers and raises funds and supports professional development. You know, the last time that we got to spend time with Delane was at one of our recognition ceremonies for the California Teachers of the Year. And we recognized her and honored her for really stewarding that work and starting that work. And she loved it. She beamed, and superintendents were here and she just beamed. That was something special. And I think that, you know, under today's circumstances where our educators work so hard, our teachers, our classified staff, our administrators, our parents, our students, they work so hard under the most difficult circumstances. Our staff here at the Department of Education across our 9 offices doing great work. We live in a culture that's all about blame, clicks, people wanting to be offering breaking news. I'm always like, you ain't no journalist, slow down. But sometimes putting out messaging that just isn't factual and isn't in the best interest of what we do for children. If Delane were here today, I suspect she would say that our job here is to give to the government what is expected. We have a responsibility to do reporting and compliance. But I suspect that Delane would say that everything that we do should be connected to an aspirational goal. How do we make it so that what we do, whatever it is, data collection, accounting, nutrition services, facilities, how do we connect it to advancing the experience for one of our almost 6 million students? How do we make it about the student who is in the seat? How do we make it about them getting a chance at an education? You know, I imagine that the teachers and faith leaders and mentors who were in charge of me as a student when I lost my parents, when we didn't have food in the household, when someone said, well, he's not in the right group, you know, he's not a blue chip. I imagine that it was people who believed like Delane, who said, every student deserves a chance. If someone had decided that I wasn't a blue chip, therefore I wouldn't get certain opportunities, I would not be standing in front of you right now. And I thank Delane and educators like Delane who believe that every student can be successful and they deserve the right supports. And so let us continue to honor Delane's legacy. It's hard when we lose a loved one, but I'm a firm believer that the best way that we honor them is by expanding and extending their legacy in the work that we do. And so let us all continue to expand and extend the legacy of Delane Easton, someone who, you know, when I first walked into this building, the first thing I saw was this picture of all the people who'd been superintendent before, going back to like, I don't know, the 1800s, and it looked like it. And it was all men, and it was all white men. No offense, I'm just saying. And I thought, you know, and there was one woman, and it's Delane, and there's been one woman to this day. And so all the future state superintendents and young women who aspire to this position or any other position, whether it be in government or in technology or in business or in medicine, let us all be like Delane and open doors of opportunity for young women. You know, as a father of 2 daughters, it's something that means a lot to me, but let us open doors for all people, regardless of their background, in the way that Delane did. And let us continue to honor her because she deserves it. When you come back to this building, what you will see outside these doors will be a continual recognition, celebration, and memorial of Delaine Easton. You will see pictures, you will see plaques, you will see reference to the work that she has done. And we will continue to celebrate her in this building. And I hope that you all will continue to help us celebrate Delaine's legacy in life and what you do every single day. Can I count on you? You can count on me. All right. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, we're not interested. You know, she was a great legislator. She was a great state superintendent. She was a great public servant. And we can all think of things that we have gotten from her. And I hope there's time in the agenda for anyone who has it on their heart to share something about Delaine. And I hope that you all will. I hope you'll tell a story. She created a standard for us about getting to all 58 counties. I think she visited 600 different schools in her tenure. I may not make that mark. Let me just say that right now. But I appreciate that she saw the importance of getting to every county. And I know that the superintendents who you'll hear from today also did that. And it's special to have Superintendents Torlakson and O'Connell here today because it's a unique job. And I want you all to recognize them because they did it at a time. I've benefited from what they have provided and Delaine has provided. I learned from them how you do this job because the job has a lot of, I want to be strength-based, but, structurally, it is different than what state superintendents do in other states. People say, well, can't you just approve this through your budget? And I tell them, we don't have a budget other than what the state legislature gives to everybody. In other states, there are more resources to do the work, but the need is no less here. And so what I've learned from Delaine and from Jack and from Tom is that to do this work, you have to maximize your relationships with the legislature and the governor and with administrator groups and interest holder groups. You have to find a way to work with everyone and sort of rise above structural limitations, because at the end of the day, there's no excuse. There is no excuse to not close the so-called achievement gap. And it must be closed because we know that our kids can achieve. And so I just want to appreciate the state superintendents who are here on behalf of Delaine. They'll talk about their own relationships, but I'm grateful to both of you and to Delaine for charting a course, for your accomplishments, and for creating a path for me to follow in doing this important work. Could we have a round of applause for State Superintendents O'Connell and Torlakson who are here today? Thank you. Thank you for being here and for being part of the journey of Delaine Easton and continuing to extend her important legacy in this work. Thank you very much. When I made the decision to run for state superintendent, I thought it was destiny because current state superintendent lived in my home county, had the same initials as me. I thought, well, this just must be a sign. And like him, though, I was not someone who'd been a teacher for many years and a coach and who, a runner and who coached young people. And, and to this day, Superintendent Torlakson continues to carry an important message about how we prepare young people for bright futures and in, career education and apprenticeship training programs. He will send me text messages and emails reminding me that we need to do certain things to help prepare our students for the future. I love always hearing the stories of Superintendent Torlakson as a science teacher and a high school coach and a state legislator. And I got a chance to watch him growing up in politics in Contra Costa County, watching him and always seeing his care for our students. Superintendent Torlakson created a program that I followed very closely when I was on the school board called the Quality Education Improvement Act that sent real money to school districts to address inequity in education. And it was very, very important. I mean, I started on the school board during the Great Recession, and we needed the resources that came from QEIA and the $3 billion that it provided to support students who were attending schools that were considered among the lowest performing. He championed a ballot measure for school construction and modernization. Ironically, we've got another one on our ballot on election day. It's almost about the same amount of money, a $9 billion ballot total to be raised that ultimately resulted in $36 billion for new schools and modernization. And we have an opportunity on November 5th to do it again. Let's do it again, Coach. Let's do it again. It's $10 billion. It's called Proposition 2. And as elected state superintendents, Tom, Jack, and I might be the only ones who can tell you about that. It's not political advocacy. It's just good for kids. And I hope that you'll vote yes for Prop 2. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming State Superintendent Tom Torlakson.
Good morning. Good morning. Are you revved up and ready? Yeah. And how do we accomplish things in this department and the previous departments? And thank you so much, Jack, for your work, Tony, for your work. I've always been so proud of CDE and your wonderful staff. So let's hear it for the staff. Let's hear it for the team. And what does the word team spell out? TEAM, what's that? Everyone working together, we get more done. So I do appreciate that. Are we going to let, I can be a little political. I'm out of office right now, but how dare Trump's team want to eliminate the Department of Education in California? How dare them do that?
No way.
No way. We're not going to let them do that. It's homegrown. It's ours. We own it. We work it. We love it. We keep it going forward in a very positive way. I'll only relate two stories. I had a similar parallel of driving, getting lost. I drove my staff crazy too. Thank you for your tolerance, Dina. I have a few adjectives that came to mind as I put a few words together for this. Awesomely articulate, spellbound. I talked to reporters who watched different sessions of the assembly when she was active in the assembly. The place went on pause. Other legislators stopped their chitter chatter to listen to Delane. When she stood up to speak, it came from the heart. It came from deep inside, from her convictions with her growing up in the way she did, the economic circumstances of her family and how they worked forward. But I came up with articulate, authentic, heartfelt, genuine, yes. Instrumental, inspirational, candid. She never held back on advice. Everybody get late. You can get plenty of it, and it doesn't cost you a penny, but it might cost you 2 or 3 hours. But I loved those phone calls, often late at night. And when we had some big decisions to make, she was there at the front, at the very front, working it forward. One example, a tale to be told. Pete Wilson was the governor. There was an unexpected surplus in revenues came into the state treasury. And he thought, this is really cool. I'm going to distribute this as a tax rebate. We're going to take that money and put it into tax rebate. Well, who said no to that? Tom Torlakson, Jack O'Connell, Delane Easton. We weren't going to let that happen. So I think what ensued is a sort of a tug of war and a battle between Pete Wilson and his staff, Delane and this team, and others of us who cared about it. So we wanted to see that happen, but they kept putting proposals forward from the administration, and we said no. What we ended up doing after a lot of almost a year probably of debate is listening to Delane, and it went to lower class sizes, it went to preschool, it went to community gardens, it went to places where it would have a lasting investment in the kids of our community and our county and our state. Rather than, I called it the pizza rebate, the Pete Wilson pizza rebate, because what he was going to do is write checks that would be maybe $15 or $25 per family, and the money would have just disappeared. Wouldn't have gone into targeted programs like we cared about. Community College Teacher of the Year, a great accomplishment for Delane. We've been very supportive of that. She was also Teacher of the Year for the California School Boards Association, so she can be proud of that. And she worked on facility issues and bond issues. And Tony, thank you for your leadership. Again, a very articulate vision you've outlined for yourself, for your team, and really appreciate what you've done in the past in that regard. So let's hear it again for our superintendent. I wrote the first $9 billion school bond, and it was fun. We were told to keep this fairly short, so I'm going to maybe tell one more little story there. The economy isn't always putting out surplus dollars, as we've learned this year. And turnaround can be quick and drastic and harmful, but it is what it is. But we had a fiscal emergency. The first day I took office in this room, we looked at the situation and said, it is an emergency. So I declared a state of emergency, fiscal emergency for schools. And we got some good press. Who was first in line to help us with that battle? Delane Easton. And what we needed to do was raise taxes, just face the fact that if we didn't, this department would have been decimated. Departments and offices of education around the state would have been hit hard. Supplies, double sessions, a whole host of negative things would have happened. But we stood the ground, we negotiated, we worked with the governor, and we did get the measure passed. So I wanted to thank all of those who helped on that. How many here have worked on some of the facilities issues? Well, thank you for your service in that area. Well, I could go on. It's fun to be here. It's just so many great memories here. I think, Jack, you'd agree, and Tony, one of the biggest dividends, one of the best, is the friendships you make and the team spirit you have. You work together, you care about each other. And it's a more of a family atmosphere than it is boss, employee, do this, do that. It's concern for the staff, but for what the staff does, what you do is you make things happen that are good for kids. Thank you, and I love you all. I want to take the privilege just to take an announcement. Tony knows that my wife May is an elected official in Contra Costa County, and has a senior center and has a teen center and all kinds of parks that she's in charge of. As the chairman of the board of the Amarillo Park District. So my wonderful wife has helped me get through everything. I'm going to get out of your way.
You're not in my way. Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, Superintendent Tom Torlakson. I had flashbacks, Superintendent, when you started with the TEAM. What does it stand for? And you're right. We need more togetherness, and because we can accomplish more. And thank you for all that you've done. And thank you, May, who serves currently on the Ambrose Recreation Park District Board of Directors. And they are a team. Another round of applause for the Torlicksons. Thank you. Thank you, Tom. When I said I was going to run for state superintendent, I was still in the assembly and everyone said, it's a mistake. Don't do it. You're going to make everybody angry. We did. But, again, I had people to look up to who also had made the decision to become state superintendent after their service in the legislature. And, when your politics are about making change for children, even though you're walking into a difficult situation, it's an easy decision. And I imagine that being the case for Superintendent Jack O'Connell, who served with distinction in the state legislature, both in the Senate and the Assembly, and who made the hallmark of his time as state superintendent on the question of closing the achievement gap. And I was trying to remember the first time I met you, Superintendent, and one of the times that I remember was as a school board member. And you were working on initiatives that were very important to me then and now, and I think important to our state, and that is the issue of closing and reducing chronic absenteeism. And you had helped to champion some data collection measures that would really help us on this issue. And you champion ways to reduce the vote threshold for passing local school bonds. And, for a school board member who was, I came from what was considered a low income school district that passed $1 billion bond and rebuilt almost every school, and couldn't do that without the reduction in the thresholds that you have created, and that you have continued to champion these questions of closing the achievement gap. And, Superintendent O'Connell is always available to give advice, but does so in the most unassuming way. Never once have I felt like the superintendent was telling me what to do. The superintendent would be very subtle and say something like, well, you might consider. And what came after that was always a really good idea. And I thought, yeah, I think I might consider that. It really, as a facilitator, leading you to help you reach your own ideas. But if you come to the superintendent, just like with Superintendent Torlickson, with a direct question about how did you handle this? How might you handle that? Superintendent O'Connell was always ready to help and aid. His relationships throughout the Capitol continue. Many of you know him in his work as a founding partner of the Capitol Advisors Group. And so in that way, we get to continue to have the benefit of working with you on important advocacy and the work that you and your firm do to help school districts interpret what's coming out of Sacramento. I think that districts often feel alone. And so many districts come to you and your firm for advice, help on addressing issues at the federal level and funding. And so we're grateful that we continue to have you as a leader and as a partner. And please help me in welcoming Superintendent Jack O'Connell. And he's a great basketball player.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Superintendent Thurman, thank you very much. And I really appreciate you putting this together to honor one of our predecessors. And it just speaks volumes for your respect and admiration for a true leader. So thank you for taking time. And nice to see Tom Torlickson again. One of the first times we met, he asked, and he's a marathon runner. He said, well, Jack, you look like you're a runner. Do you run? I said, well, Tom, I run every 4 years. And that's kind of, that's kind of it. Since Tom introduced his wife, I should introduce my wife, Dr. Ann O'Connell, a former superintendent who's here in the back. So thanks for coming up. And she's sitting next to one of the other founding partners and a good friend of the superintendent, and that would be Barrett Snyder. So Barrett, thanks for walking over, making that long trek over here. You know, Delane really burst on the scene in 1986 up here in Sacramento. I mean, I was in the assembly and serving with an individual who, preceded her for that assembly seat where she lived. A really nice guy, smart guy, Alistair McAllister. Remember Assemblyman McAllister, the most conservative member of the Democratic caucus, clearly, strongly pro-life, was never going to vote for one of those tax increases. Good guy, smart guy, college professor, as I recall. And then in 1986, he announced he was going to run, I think, for state controller, wasn't it, Camille? And so political operatives came to us in the assembly, the Democratic caucus, and said, we got to find somebody just like Alistair McAllister. And we didn't find anybody like Alistair McAllister. And so as I recall, some guy named Bill Lockyer and Johan Clays and a couple others started to promote this city council person, Union City, and saying that, we have a good, strong candidate. And so our political operatives saying, well, is she conservative? Nope. Is she, pro-life? Nope. Is she going to vote for a tax increase in a heartbeat? Will she? And Delane ended up running and winning and was just a true champion across the street, as you heard so eloquently from both Tom and Tony in the legislature, and became the chair of Assembly Education Committee. Some guy named Willie, somebody appointed her to chair. And I was smart enough to know I want to sit next to Delane on the education committee so that I knew what was going on. I kind of would peek over at her notes to see what was going to happen. And frequently, she knew the author's bill better than the author. And I can't tell you how many times I would hear an author say, well, Madam Chair, I never really thought of that. Or I guess that would be an unintended consequence of my legislation. And I'm sure Delane's thinking, dude, you should have read your bill, But she was always a step ahead. And I wanted to sit next to her so I wouldn't miss one of her signals, which she was, good to give, and you didn't want to misstep and get that Easton glare at you. So it was easier for me to just get kicked under the rostrum there and make sure I was in the right line of fire there. And she was a great speaker. You heard that, or a great orator, one of the best. In the assembly, when we were in the assembly together, Delane was the second best speaker in the assembly caucus next to this Willie guy. And when Speaker Brown couldn't make an event, his office would recommend Delane. And so it's a story I heard Dee Dee Albert tell, and I know the story, and it's really, really accurate. Big labor group, influential. It's one in Los Angeles, Southern California. And Willie spoke to them every year. Well, this one year he couldn't do it. So his office said, you should get the chair of the Assembly Education Committee, Delane Easton, to give the speech. So Delane, I remember, asked me, Jack, I'm gonna go speak to this big group. You got any hints or anything? I don't give you hints on how to speak. I mean, she was just the master. And so I asked her a week or two later, I said, hey, how'd that big speech go? And she said, it went very well. I said, you get a standing ovation? Oh yeah, just a matter of fact. So it was 1 year later, Delane said to me, Jack, do you remember that speech in LA, the labor coalition that Willie normally gives? They just invited me to be the speaker. And so I said, oh, Willie can't make it? And she says, no, they invited me. I said, well, what are you going to do about Willie? And she said, well, maybe the next time I can't make a commitment or give a speech, I recommend Willie Brown to give the speech for him. Then in 1994, she had a chance to run for state superintendent, and talk about the perfect position for her was right here. It was just a perfect position. Her passion for education, her knowledge, she understood the system. She was part of that system. I've gone back and read a couple of interviews and watched some of her interviews the last couple of years, and where she talks about who really made her life. Sure, her parents, but then it was the teachers and it was the counselors that told her she could do whatever it is she wanted to do. And then working so hard with so many of you, that really made a difference. You have made a tremendous difference, as you've heard here already. The world-class content standards that we have and adopted, that was Delane. The frameworks to match the standards, that was Delane. And one of the advantages I had by succeeding her was when I'd go national and meet with others, I could take credit for all this great work, which I made a career out of taking credit for other people's work. The gardens in the classroom, she was passionate about making sure the kids had healthy, nutritious meals, because she knew that this was going to be a skill acquired that would benefit these students for the rest of their life. You heard Tony eloquently talk about her commitment to technology. She's the one that organized the first Net Day, and she wanted it done on a Saturday. She made this work on a Saturday. And she did it with Democrats and Republicans. And she made the pitch in each of the caucuses across the street and said, on this Saturday, please go out and wire a school. Work with your local tech companies, the phone companies, all that kind of stuff. And we'll make that happen. She was passionate on early childhood education. She was super passionate on class size reduction. And probably the only time I ever really got mad at her or a little disappointed was I authored the bill to lower the vote threshold that these guys talked about a minute ago. And she gave a better speech on my bill than I did. And so for that, but it was very, very hard to follow her. It wasn't that bad, here working with the state board and things. And it was a challenge, and challenge for everybody. But especially when you had Republican governors. But that was a challenge. Doing the administrative work here, that was certainly very, very doable. But what wasn't doable was following her in the field. Such a great speaker. She was motivational. She was inspirational. She had all the one lines down for her speech. I mean, can't tell you how many times we heard about the school bus up on blocks that was being used to educate kids. Remember, Terry, on that? How many times did we hear about Cadillac prisons and jalopy schools? That whole pitch. I remember, and we were actually over in the legislature, but she passed out a science book. So in the early 90s, that was used for a district in the Silicon Valley. And it said, someday man may even walk on the moon. And that's a science book that was in use that day. Or the geography class that had the map of the Belgian Congo, with all of that. So those were some of her areas and great one-liners. I probably heard her speak 50, 60, 70, 80 times in my career. Every single time she left to a deserving standing ovation. So when we were driving up here a couple months ago, Ann said to me, and I told her that, I said, Delane always got this tremendous standing ovation. And Ann said, well, did you ever get a standing ovation, Jack? I said, yeah, actually twice. It was the same speech. And she said, well, tell me about it. And I said, well, I really had a complex because every place I would go to speak first 6 months in my term, Delane had already been there. She'd been to every AXA group. She'd been to every school board group. She'd been to every teacher group, the classified, the school business guys. She'd been to chambers. There must have been 3 Delanes. And if she got lost, she made great time. But it was truly, truly impossible to follow her. And so in May, I thought, I got to try and find some place she's never been. So as a kid, when I wanted to go overseas, I went to Catalina Island. So I called the principal, true story. I was right upstairs here in May of my first year. I called the principal of Catalina High School. And I said, Delane East's never been to your school? He said, not that I know of, but they're part of the Long Beach School District. She's been to the school district a lot. But I said, never your school. She said, no, never been overseas, you know. And so, so I said, well, do you have a graduation speaker next month? And the guy said, no. I said, well, you do now. And the guy couldn't say no to the state superintendent, or it'd be good luck on your audit, you know, for your. So I went over to Catalina and had this speech written and everything by the pros here. Great speech, maybe a little long. I don't think they wanted 45 minutes for the graduation. So did you ever use the line towards the end of your speech and in conclusion, standing ovation? So I wasn't real good at reading the crowd, although there were 2,000 people up, 34 graduating seniors behind me, leading the applause, you know. And at that time, I didn't realize everybody didn't come to hear the graduation speaker that they never heard of, you know, kind of thing. So I finished my speech. And so after my final 5 minutes, as I'm walking off the stage, I got my second standing ovation for doing that. But thank you for helping Delane, truly making a big time difference, as you very eloquently heard here earlier. And thank you for really improving not only our state, but our country. And you've helped not just Delane, but I think back, I remember looking at those pictures too, and the people that I knew and met and respected. I go back to Wilson Riles and Bill Honig and Delane and me. And thanks for helping the twin T's here, Tom Torlakson and Tony Thurman. Because if we continue to work hard, and if we continue to work smart, and if we continue to work together, the best is yet to come for our great state. And then, and only then, the best is yet to come for our great country. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right. There's three.
Those were great stories. Thank you so much. And you all deserve a standing ovation. All right, now it's my pleasure to invite one of my former colleagues, Richard Whitmore, one of our former deputy superintendents for finance and technology, and later chief policy advisor in the Easton administration.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming. It's a privilege to be here to honor Delane, and a privilege to follow her successors, each of whom I know she held in high regard, and also held their cell phone numbers close whenever she had an opinion about the needs of California students. And thank you, all three of you, for always taking those calls. I know personally she always wanted to stay connected to the work and really appreciated those conversations with all of you. I do think she's looking down, wondering why there aren't more childcare seats still, and you might get a call about that, but and also special thanks to Dina for keeping Delane's memory alive, for organizing this today, and for everything except for making me follow Jack and his standing ovation. In honor of Delane, I printed these remarks in 18-point font and no more than 6 words a line, but the big difference is that I'm mostly going to read what's written in front of me. I met Delane in 1984, and in fact, we had offices next door to each other. Famously, we took a class together at something called Communispond, where you gave a short speech that was videotaped, and you were then forced to watch it with yourself and other peers and self-evaluate, as well as listen to other people evaluate it. And you can imagine who was a wild success at that and who was not, and just went out for a stiff drink afterwards. But it was my first insight into how powerful Delane could really be when you gave her a microphone and put her in front of people. When Delane was elected state superintendent, she tracked me down at a small independent school where I had been working for a little bit of time and asked me to join in this effort. I'm as grateful today as I was then, despite the salary cut, because she launched my real career with that invitation and also kept it going long beyond our work together at CDE. I want to use my time today to tell you about what I think are Delane's greatest hits. You hear a lot about class size reduction. You hear a lot about kind of the big memorable moments, but there are a lot of other things she got done. And I want to frame it as greatest hits because she did love music. And for many years, when it was the right format, I would bring her up the best CDs of the year for the holidays. Track one on her greatest hits, I think it's called Let's Get It Started, is this amazing planning retreat that we did in her first couple months in office. A couple of you are nodding. I got to help plan it because we had done strategic planning work together in those offices in the 80s. Not that many people were in the room, and some of them have probably forgotten this by now, but I still remember it vividly. The standards movement, which Jack talked about, was just beginning to take root across the country, and we didn't even have a statewide assessment in California, much less any standards. Someone, and I think her name rhymed with the rain, suggested we pursue a statewide initiative to amend the state's constitution to include curriculum standards. We worked on this over a day or two, and we came up with a more elegant solution. Ruth McKenna took the lead on creating challenge standards in partnership with willing districts. Those standards became the basis of the first set of curriculum standards that Jack talked about. And I brought one of the books with me today to prove that this really happened. It sits on my shelves, and every once in a while I look and go, wow, that was a lot. Track two of the greatest hits, I think we'll call Man, I Feel Like a Woman. And this is about Delane's continuous and really never quite finished effort to get the education leadership of the state to accept a woman's voice and perspective. We got to see her in private. You all saw her brimming with confidence whenever she went out in public. But in private, those were hard times coming into this office, even though she had been through the legislature and faced a lot of the same issues. And it's ironic that in a sector that's so female dominated in many places, it was so difficult in Sacramento in the 90s. She won a few over by charm. The person I remember is Tom Juni at AXA. Early on, came to have a great and trusted relationship with her and was the first of those leaders that really made her feel welcome in the job. She won a few over with a little bit stronger language and action. And in all cases, I think she relied on that intellect that was both incisive and comprehensive at the same time. I've never met anyone who knew everything about everything in the way that Delane did. Track three of the greatest hits, you've heard a little bit about this, On the Road Again, is her respect for all of California. I remember those 58 counties as maybe being part of a second run for office. It was a lot, I'll just say that, in part because she couldn't travel alone. She always had a CHP driver and at least one person from CDE, and many of you here went on many of those trips. I see you out there nodding. I do think Camille Mabin and Jeff Pingree suffered the most and might still be owed some workers' comp for the excessive time in automobiles before the seats would adjust electronically. The fourth track of my greatest hits is, of course, I Won't Back Down. Let's be honest, Delane loved a good debate. And if it turned into an argument, then you better make sure you have all your facts in order and your ability to articulate them quickly and efficiently, well practiced. I got to watch some really memorable scenes, some just outside this room, never actually in this room, because she didn't really like to come in this room all that much. And some upstairs here and some upstairs in our old building. The one I want to remember for you today is when she asked a state board member in her office just before a meeting what math textbook that person's own children were using in their charter school. And let's just say later that day, that textbook got adopted by the state board, which wasn't poised to do so at the beginning. My fifth track is We Didn't Start the Fire. I was going to kind of wrap through a lot of things that were happening, but I just want to acknowledge there was so much going on. And I think Delane's predecessors acknowledge this too. There was always a lot going on. She needed two chief deputies to manage it all. class size reduction, school gardens, high school exit exams, I think authored by Senator O'Connell, charter schools just starting up, computers coming into school, consent decrees, school takeovers, district takeovers, State Board of Ed suing us on a weekly basis, budget arguments with the gov, CTA versus Russ Gould, No Child Left Behind, everybody can read by third grade, open court, based teacher professional development, and one of the best, the superintendent's correspondence system, which may still exist today. And it took up a lot of time. My last track, People Have the Power, is really about her people. Now, I'm probably not objective on this point, but I think Delane had an amazing reputation for finding talent to come to the CDE. And then when they got here, giving them important work to do and trusting them to do it well. She wasn't always the easiest boss. Dina acknowledged this, but she was always the best boss, and she always wanted to be the best boss. And she never diminished her expectations of anyone. I found myself places I never expected to be, sitting in that seat at the State Board of Education, at CalSTRS, running the Compton School District, simply because she trusted me to do it. Definitely not because I was trained or ready in any way, and I always did it without question. And when I needed to prioritize my family, she helped me do that. And when I could come back, she brought me back to CDE or helped me find West Ed or introduced me into my first real district role as an interim superintendent in Davis. She was, simply put, extraordinary, and she surrounded herself with more extraordinary. And part of the extraordinary experience was that it was a team. Thank you for the lead in, Tom. While I've done other work I'm equally proud of, I've never had the opportunity to do it with such an aligned and supportive group of people. I told Dina I would need Kleenex, and she promised me there would be Kleenex on this podium. The chiefs, Bob, Annette, and especially my good friend who I miss so much, Scott Hill, Ruth and Leslie as the instructional leaders, Camille and Paula, who you're going to hear from also, and the team of Ada, Christine, Lorraine, Perla, and others who kept us running like minute by minute, and occasionally were very good bookies in the early seasons of Idle. Also my gang, Pat, Henry, Danny, Sherry, the inimitable Alice. I hope you're out there on Zoom if you're not here, and I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody. And my first work friend, Mary Curlin, who we used to race through the bathroom so we wouldn't miss too much of whatever was going on. And she always could beat me. I know Delane is hanging out with some of us and keeping an eye on the rest of us down here. And I'm sure she's watching this today, and I will keep her vision and her tenacity and her friendship with me always. Thank you. And thanks, Delane.
Thank you, Richard. I do have Kleenex if anybody needs it. Okay, next is Paula Mishima, who served in various roles during the Easton administration as legislative rep, Director of Government Affairs, Chief Policy Advisor, and Deputy Associate Superintendent of the Education Equity Access and Support Branch. And she's a recent retired annuitant, so I think she is the person that is the next to me as the longest surviving person at CDE. Come on, Paula.
Well, it's hard to follow Richard because now I feel teary-eyed, but my comments aren't quite as personal, but thank you for acknowledging all those people. It really brought back a lot of memories. But one of my roles when I was policy advisor for Superintendent Easton was not that she needed it, but was to write her talking points. So when I think of what Delane's contributions to public education, I kind of, these talking points kind of pop in my head. And, she always had a few bullets about universal preschool. She really valued deeply investment in that. And she would say it all the time. And at that time, this is many years ago, right? Everyone thought, oh, that's Delane, she's kind of unrealistic out there. That's never going to happen. But, I believe she believed that, you need to paint that vision continuously and it will happen. And what do you know, today it's a reality. But the talking points that garnered the most bullets were really that three-legged stool of standards, assessments, and accountability. And it's that stool upon which public education still, sits today. And Delane knew that all of the legs of that stool would need to continue to evolve over time, to evolve with the times. And I think one thing that folks don't really know, because it wasn't in the talking points, is Delane's really early advocacy for student level data. So for those of you who don't know me, I've been working on the student level data system called CalPADS for many years. So this is kind of like, I know a little bit about this, but when Delane first came and became superintendent, we only had aggregate data collections called CBEDS. And CalPADS did not exist, but we had this one division director, he might've been deputy at the time, Pat Keegan, who unfortunately I don't see him here today, but he really advocated to Delane, we need to collect data at the student level. Just think how much easier that would make everyone's lives, because at the time, if the feds changed their reporting requirements, we had to turn around and ask districts to give us that data again, but in a different combination, right? So this way, we had student level data. We could just recombine all the demographic information in a different way. And wow, that'd be so much easier. And you know what? That sounds really, really logical. But at the time, the politics were kind of different. I would say the Assembly Republicans in particular, they no way trusted the Department of Education, usually run by Democrats, to have student level data, right? So what horrible things could we possibly, would we be doing with that data? But nevertheless, Delane, gave Pat basically the go ahead, yeah, you go with that, right? And lo and behold, in 1997, legislation was passed piloting collecting student level data and bringing it to the department. And it actually authorized at that time CSIS, the California School Information Services, which is still with us today. That was in 1997. By the time the authorization for CalPADS itself eventually occurred, that was in year 2000, which is basically the last year of Delane's second term. And so CalPADS didn't even exist when Delane was here, but she planted the seed for student level data. And by the time CalPADS actually came to be in 2009, over 10 years later, half the districts were already submitting student level data through that pilot program called CSIS. So she really laid the groundwork for the foundation of our education system, as well as the seeds for making sure the legs of that stool would stand strong. I mean, as Cindy knows today, CalPADS feeds most of the data needed to do the accountability system on the dashboard. So basically, when I think of Delane and her main contributions, I think of that three-legged stool and all the groundwork she laid there. Then finally, I just want to take this opportunity to thank Delane for what she gave me personally, things I never was able to really tell her directly. When I was here already as a legislative rep under Superintendent Dawson when Delane was elected. So I was kind of here already. I didn't come from the Capitol, though I had worked in the Capitol under Vasconcellos in the Ways and Means Committee, but I had come before Delane. So she didn't really know me, but she put her trust in me. She gave me opportunities that I would never, ever have otherwise, as Director of Governmental Affairs, as policy advisor, as Deputy Superintendent. But I was only able to add value, I think, because of the team she brought with us, Richard, Camille, and many of the people, all the people that Richard already named. We were bonded together with passion we all shared for public education and the contributions and importance of public education to our society, and dare I say, to our democracy. So we were very passionate, all of us, about what we did. But what really was at the base of that passion was Delane really cared about kids. She cared about all kids in California, and she cared about our kids. In fact, to her, kids were our polecats, right? That's why I have this shirt, cats on it. I don't really know what a polecat is, but she would always ask, how are your polecats, right? Well, anyway, and if you walked into her office back then, you would be reminded right away, the reason why we're doing everything we did was for the kids. When you walked in her office, the first thing you saw were literally hundreds of stuffed animals staring at you, right? There was this long kind of cabinet that lined the wall, and all these stuffed animals were on it. And one day I'd walked into the office, it was later in the day, and Delane wasn't there, but I had my second kid, my middle kid, who's about 2 years old at the time, was with me. She walked in the office, totally made herself comfortable, looked at all those stuffed animals and took one down. It was a Pooh Bear. I figured, that's fine. She can play with Pooh Bear. That will, occupy her for a few minutes while I finish doing whatever I was doing. But of course, Pooh Bear came home with me that night, or with Kayla that night. And then I thought, I'll just, return Pooh Bear the next day. I was hoping that this Pooh Bear was like, hadn't been given to Delane by the president of Disney or something like that. But, but as it turns out, of course, I never returned Pooh Bear, because Pooh Bear became that one thing that my daughter was totally attached to. So I did feel guilty for the next number of years, and probably 5 years later, we were preparing a thank you video to show at Delane's last department-wide meeting. And I took that opportunity to confess on video that my daughter had stolen Pooh Bear. But I assured Delane that Pooh Bear had gotten a great education. One, he was never lonely, except for the time he was left in the dentist's office overnight. But Pooh was read to every night and continued to be read to tonight. That Pooh had went on many vacations, and that Pooh was getting the appropriate civics education, having gone to the 2000 Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles. And by the way, Pooh would go to many more conventions. And in fact, I would have brought Pooh here today, but he's right now in Portland with my daughter. But putting that aside, to me, Pooh Bear's life during that tenure with Delane kind of, mirrored my life, in the sense that I feel like I learned so much, was educated so much by Delane and by my fellow colleagues. And we all experienced life together. We celebrated our achievements. Somewhere I have a mug that says, "We did it in 3 months, class size reduction." We had laughed. Carrick's here. I will never forget when Carrick was on stage in a hula skirt. I don't remember why you were doing that, but he was in a hula skirt dancing in front of the whole department. I remember us all being in the executive conference room, planning for months for Y2K. I don't know if you all remember that, but it was kind of like everyone was worried the world would end once the century switched over. I will remember always being in Delane's office, watching on the television with my colleagues, my family, as those planes crashed into Twin Towers. So I can remember that very vividly. So not to end on a downer, but it's kind of like in today's times, in some ways, feels even more challenging than the two planes crashing into the Twin Towers. But I'm grateful. I think we're all grateful for the foundation that Delane laid for public education, for hopefully that will help us weather these times and get us through. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Next, we have two speakers, Tom Adams, former Deputy Superintendent of the Teaching and Learning Branch, and Carrick Ashley, former Deputy Superintendent of Assessment, Accountability, Data, and Technology Branch.
I'm Carrick. It was the suit or the hula skirt, and I chose to go with the suit. This year I went to my 50th high school reunion, and it was so great to see old friends, faces I recognized. They had all gotten so old they didn't recognize me. But it was bittersweet, because as you're there with your group, you're remembering classmates that you lost along the way. And it feels like that same kind of homecoming now as I see faces and as I remember Delane. Tom and I are here together because we have similar careers. We both started under Bill Honig Worked for about 25 years. At the end, I was deputy superintendent, assessment, accountability, data stuff. Tom was deputy superintendent for curriculum and instruction. We both worked for 6 superintendents. I was going to say Delane was my favorite. We've got 3 here. It's awkward. But I can say, without doubt, Delane was my favorite female superintendent. You know, it's very appropriate that people have come up and talked about Delane's accomplishments or things that were accomplished during her tenure. For areas that I worked on, the New Star assessments were during her time. Class size reduction, I had the great opportunity to work on class size reduction under Ann Evans, who led the charge. When Delane would speak, she often gave me more credit than I deserved working on that program. It was really Ann that drove the bus there, and I was just along for the ride. But it was a great honor to work on that program with her. The API started under Delane. And of course, you know, nobody really liked the API when it came out because nobody really likes accountability. They like accountability for other people. But schools and districts weren't all that crazy about it until the feds gave us AYP. And then once we had the federal requirements, people said, you know, that California system's not so bad after all. So it was great being able to acknowledge all of the things that she did when she was here. But I really want to use my brief time to talk about what Delane meant to me personally. And I think that many of you can relate to it because it's actually been mentioned already a few times. And that's just how inspirational Delane was. Anytime that I heard her speak, I had never heard someone talk about education the way Delane did. It really changed me when I looked at education and I heard her speak. She made me want to be more compassionate and more passionate about the work that we do. When she talked about helping kids in need, or she helped struggling schools to meet the higher standards that we were going to set, she meant it. You could feel that she meant it. And when she felt something that strongly, she was also willing to fight for it. And that's been mentioned already again, is that she had that passion that went beyond the speeches, and she was willing to go to the governor's office, to go to the state board when things weren't all that, there wasn't so much togetherness back then. But she was willing to stake her career and to stand up and fight for what was right if she thought it was something that kids needed. It was when Delane got going on a speech, it was church, you know. I mean, for educators, obviously, but I can't think of anything. What more could any of us want for a life led well than to be remembered for inspiring others? Tom.
So I had the benefit of not only working for Delane, but also being her neighbor. And so Paula, I thought Polecat was my daughter's nickname. But we all know what a fierce advocate Delane was for public education, right? She was always talked about updating schools and the need to really make sure that, you know, like you said, you know, the great line about prisons versus schools in this state. But I got to know her in part in terms of working here because I was involved and I was working for a division called Curriculum Frameworks and Instructional Resources, which is very closely tied to the state board in terms of their work on curriculum frameworks and instructional materials. And so I was actually there in the midst of a lot of the battles over standards in the late 90s. And what we often forget is how prescient Delane Easton was in terms of the content of the standards. Because she's the one, when it came to language arts, she was the first one to say, we have to have all kids reading by the end of grade 3. She was the one who said we have to have good reading instruction. But where the point of agreement ended is when she said, we also have to have rich literature and nonfiction texts in the schools, and our students have to understand them. And we also have to teach writing. Well, it didn't happen in the 97 standards, but guess what? With the Common Core standards, what gets a robust treatment? Teaching of writing, rich texts, so in that way, she was successful. When it came to math, she agreed with the board about the need for basic skills and all kids having higher math skills. But where she disagreed was on the important issue of mathematical thinking and applying mathematics to the world around you. And of course, that's where they diverge. But guess what? When we adopted the Common Core standards, what got robust treatment? Once again, Delane's ideas. When it came to science, she was clear that we had to update science. She didn't want it to be just a simple body of knowledge that you memorize and then regurgitated on a test. She wanted students to be able to think like a scientist and set up a scientific experiment and then be able to create new knowledge. Of course, that wasn't there in the 98 standards, only the part about it being a body of knowledge. But what would later validate her position? The Next Generation Science Standards in 2013. And she also got involved in the history social science standards. I remember one particular incident. The standards had come to the state board and her eagle eye noticed there wasn't the 19th Amendment. Yeah. And so you can just imagine Delane Easton saying to someone, don't you think we want little girls to know why their mom can vote? But she was also about making education inclusive. We've talked about that. She fought for English language development standards and bilingual education. Remember, even after Prop 227 had passed, we all forget, in this post Prop 58 world of 2016, how hard of a position that was back before we celebrated English language development and multilingualism. She wanted health education to be inclusive and supportive of our LGBTQ students, and all information not to be based on morals, but to be medically accurate. Of course, she would only get that validated in 2008 with the health standards, and then later the Fair Education Act. She also was the advocate for arts education back when people thought it was a luxury to have arts in the schools. She knew the importance of personal exploration and discovery, which is why she wanted school libraries to have up-to-date materials and to be places of student-directed learning. And as mentioned before, she was an early advocate for universal preschool. And finally, in 2018, when she was running for governor, everyone else said, what a great idea. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Delane applied these principles to her day-to-day life. Delane lived in Davis and gave to the community in many ways. I know as her neighbor and served on the school board. In fact, I still remember I was still trying to decide whether I would run for school board, and I had 3 friends call me, and the last one to call me was Delane Easton. She said, you got to run for school board. And there I was. We were going to Hawaii the next day on a vacation. So I had to go down, put my papers in, and run for office. Got my final vacation before I got elected to office, and spent 8 years on the Davis School Board just because of her, in part because of her. But she supported every parcel tax, every bond measure. She also brought along her friends. Thank you, Jack and Tom. And she also made sure that our new good friend, Superintendent Thurman, came, and both Tom and Tony were able to swear me in as a trustee at Davis. So she always brought us to the big stage in Davis. But I want to really think about the last political act, or one of the last political acts that Delane had. Up in Woodland, there was a school board member who said, I don't think I could support all LGBTQ students in our school. And so a recall effort was organized. And we in Davis decided to support our good neighbors up in Woodland and do a fundraiser. So I went to the fundraiser that night, and who was there out in front saying, we got to support this recall. We got to make sure we have a trustee who supports all students. Delane Easton. And that's who she was. So yeah, I've talked a little bit about her policy achievements and everything, but I can say her greatest achievements were, one, the belief that all students can learn, and we are at fault for not providing everyone with the same opportunities. The other is that there is beauty in the diversity of our students. And when we include all of them, we make for a better place to learn and live. God bless you, Delane.
Thank you very much, Tom and Carrick. Our next speaker is joining us via Zoom since she lives in San Diego. I'm happy she could join us today and share. I'd like to introduce Karen O'Connor, 2000 California Teacher of the Year and a past chair of the California Teachers of the Year Foundation. Karen, you're on.
Your mic is muted.
Okay, there we go. It all fell apart, of course, at the last moment. I'm glad to be on here. I really appreciate the honor of being asked to share some memories with Delane. As a California Teacher of the Year and then personal friend of Delane, of course, my experiences are very different from those we've heard today. But I want you to know that all of those passions of Delane came through to all of her, not only her Teachers of the Year, but all teachers who heard her speak. You've heard about all the things that she was passionate about. California's kids, she called them her kids. And I always loved that about her because she didn't have children of her own, but she adopted every child in California and wanted them to be there at their very best. And so she motivated all of us to be at our best. And, you know, she'd love to talk about how she started the California Teacher of the Year program. And I can tell you, as a new deer in the headlights Teacher of the Year, sitting out in the hallway with a brown paper sack lunch provided by the deli next door, that was something that really needed to happen. She took a group of teachers that had already been through these experiences and started this program. And this has come such a long way. Every year now, they have a gala, as you know, in honor of all of her brand new Teachers of the Year, who she liked to call her rock stars. And you know what? I'm pretty sure Delane never missed a gala. She always loved to give a rousing celebratory speech at the reception. And then, of course, she'd always meet us in the bar afterwards. You know, she just loved it. And it was one of the things she really loved. And after she left office and became a teacher at Mills College, you know how she loved to inspire young women to go into politics, and especially champion women who were the first in their families to go to college. And, you know, she used to tell me how proud she was of being from a blue collar family herself. Her dad was in the Navy, and she wanted those students of hers to have the same future that her daddy, as she called him, dreamed of for her. And, you know, I have a personal connection to that as well, because years ago, my daughter was running for her first term for Poway School Board, and Delane flew down for a fundraiser in my backyard to support my daughter, who was applying for, you know, or running for just a school board position, nothing that, you know, was statewide. And over the years, Delane would call her from time to time and encourage her to run for the assembly or the Senate. So she was always looking for those young women that she could move up, you know, into state politics. And over the years, Elaine and I became friends and travel buddies. And I think we first bonded on this educator's mission to Japan. And we bonded over singing Irish ditties, as she called them, on our tour bus. Believe me, much to the dismay of the rest of our group. But you know Delaine, and let's see, as Richard mentioned, her greatest hits, she loved music. And when, there wasn't a lot of response to her Irish ditties, then she moved into folk songs. And once she started singing folk songs, Peter, Paul, and Mary got everybody going and relaxed everybody because, we were all excited and in awe of traveling with Delaine Easton. But then I think that's when I got to know the more relaxed, silly side of Delaine that maybe those of you who worked with her in a more formal situation never saw. We traveled together. Starting the year after that, she wanted to go to Ireland. And since we were both Irish, we decided to go ahead and do that. Well, I think the highlight of that trip was trying to drive a stick shift and get back to our hotel. We dealt with these roundabouts that had 5 different exits until we were pulling out our hair. And it was kind of like Groundhog Day because we went round and round and ended up in the same little fishing village. At least 3 times before we finally got back to our hotel. And no, they did not have Google Maps back then either. It was even worse because the map they gave us was so inaccurate that we were terribly lost. So yes, definitely things have changed since then. But during that trip, she mastered her Irish brogue and she would tell, I don't know where she got all these jokes, but she always had a lot of fun jokes. And I'm sure many of you have heard the one about the Clancy brothers in the local pub. But, well, next time we'll talk about that. But driving on the wrong side of the road with a stick shift when we were promised an automatic, which would have come 8 hours later, gave us a chance to really get to know each other. And we kind of, at one point, Delaine pulled over and she said, I can't do this anymore. You drive. And of course, neither of us had driven a stick shift in years. So we had a lot of fun and a few arguments over that one. But I think just from the many trips I took with Delaine, we kind of broke through, I guess, both my being in awe of traveling with her initially and her reticence to just be a regular person, which I know was initially hard for her to do. In fact, we finally got her beyond looking at everybody as staff, which was pretty funny because on our first trip, I remember her saying to me one day, I'm thirsty. Are you thirsty? And I said, yeah, I'm thirsty. And she said, well, go get us some water, which I did. But then towards the end of the trip, I said to her, Delaine, are you thirsty? And she said, yeah, I am. And I said, why don't you go get us some water? And right then, I know she knew what I was doing because she said later that she wasn't used to not having people do things for her. So that was pretty funny. And, we went on a lot of trips together. She'd call me up once or twice a year and say, well, where are we going next? She was always excited to explore history and her love of travel. And we just kind of clicked and it worked really well together. We went on wine and cooking tours in Italy and we went on European river cruises. But I think for me, the most telling was just sharing our lives and, sometimes just in I would call it slumber party style. And we talk about funny, sometimes embarrassing experiences and sometimes sad, kind of heartfelt experiences. But we always pinky swore that we would never share it with another soul. So with that promise, my Delaine tales are over. I have been so lucky to know her, and she made such a difference in not only my life, but in the lives of all the California Teachers of the Year and all of those that she mentored. So thank you so much for letting me speak a little about my friend Delaine.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks for sharing and joining us.
My pleasure.
Next, we have Naja Rosales, who served as Delane's special assistant and was the main person who staffed her at events. Naja.
So sing my friends, be blithe, be gay, or weep my friends with sorrow. What California's today, the rest will be tomorrow. You know, Delane started that quote off. You know it'd be a great, great speech. Good morning, everyone. My name is Naja. It's an honor to stand before you today to remember and celebrate the life of someone who meant the world to me, Delane Easton. It's so wonderful to see friends and former colleagues, and it feels so surreal to be back here at the Department of Education, as it's been 20 years since I've been here. Thank you, Superintendent Thurman and Dina and CDA staff for getting us all together here today. I first met Delane in 2000 when I joined her administration as a special assistant, AKA the travel assistant, the body guide, the Jill of all trades, as some would say. What started as a job quickly became much more. I met colleagues who became lifelong friends: Dina, Catherine, Jerry, Mary, Camille, Ada, Judy, Diane, and Ron. As her term ended, Delane didn't just remain my boss. She became my mentor, my friend, my confidant, and even a surrogate mom. As you know, she didn't have any kids. She used to joke with me and say, you know, Naja, I'd love to adopt you, but I don't think your parents would like that very much. Delane had a gift for seeing the best in people, often spotting potential they couldn't see in themselves. She nurtured that potential with the same passion she showed to every educator, public servant, and activist she supported. Like some of you have said, she did show up at people's events and speak on their behalf. I was always so in awe of her. Even after her tenure ended, she would always be and saying, oh, this is my good friend, Naja, and you should support this person here. And then I would find myself like donating and writing checks to that person. And so whether it was advocating for a better classroom, supporting a campaign, or speaking at someone's event, Delane was always there. She believed with every fiber of her being that every child deserved the chance to thrive, not just as students, but as future members of society. And she spent her life making sure that these opportunities were accessible to all, not just a privileged few. One of the joys of traveling with Delane was meeting all different kinds of people: teachers, staff, paraeducators, parents, and most importantly, children. We'd visit Delane Easton Elementary School in Union City. And during one of the visits, there was a combined 3rd and 4th grade class. The students gathered as the teachers would introduce Delane to the students. And so she'd give her usual inspiring talk. And then came the Q&A, or really more like statements. You're the Delane Easton, would be one of the students would say. And then one student said, I never knew you were even real. And then Delane would bend down and say, pinch herself and say, you know, I'm very real, last I checked. And so my personal favorite, why would your parents name you after a school? That was my personal favorite. Even in her busiest moments, Delane always made time to connect. She'd actually read me passages of Emily Bronte. Just as her father read to her when she was young. We'd take long walks, have brunches, and treat ourselves to mani-pedis. I remember a moment when she gave me some much needed advice. Her words, full of love and humor, stayed with me. Like Karen O'Connor said, I'd keep some of the things that she'd tell me. Delane's sense of humor was sharp, and she never let me forget that we must always fight fiercely to the things that matter. I will forever be grateful to have known Delane. Her lessons, her generosity, her unwavering belief in what's possible will remain with me always. She lived with purpose, passion, and love, and her legacy will endure in every person she touched. So I'd like to close with one of Delane's favorite quotes at the end of her speeches from John Adams in a letter to his wife, Abigail. I must study politics and war, that my sons may have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy. My sons ought to study mathematics and philosophy, geography, natural history, naval architecture, navigation, commerce, and agriculture in order to give their children a right to study painting, poetry, music, architecture, statuary, tapestry, and porcelain. For Delane, math and science were crucial, but she knew that the arts and music were just as essential. She believed in a well-rounded education that nurtures the whole person. Thank you, Delane, for being a guiding light, for believing in me, and for inspiring us to be better, bolder, and braver. I will miss you. I will miss your magic mushroom soup, but your spirit will always live with me. God bless you, Delane. Thank you all.
Thank you, Naja. Next, we have Camille Mabin, my colleague from the state capitol, who was federal liaison, traveled with Delane, and senior policy advisor to Delane.
Thank you all. I am going to keep this really short. In fact, I said to Dina, you can give me this real quickly because I think everything that should have been said has been said. I've been staring at that picture since I walked in and just seeing the light and the life in an incredible woman who I was fortunate enough to call my friend and my boss, and who gave me, as she did many of us, the opportunities of a lifetime. I think I remember, and I don't know if you remember, we were in the assembly and there was a bill up that she was supporting. I think it was libraries or something. And I can remember Jack saying to Delane on the floor, I will vote for your bill if you promise not to give that speech one more time. Because determined is not a word, it's less than she was about the things she believed in. Passion was just her middle name. And as people have said, she made us all work harder to ensure that all children had a quality education. And she set a really high bar for us and inspired us to do better. She gave us opportunities that probably, as you've heard today, nobody else maybe would have, but she did. And she believed in us maybe when we didn't even believe in ourselves. And so I will always be grateful to that. When we arrived here, actually at 721, I can remember Joe Simkowicz, who was the chief legal counsel at the time. Delane was insistent that she read every contract that was coming her way for signature. And I can remember Joe going, Delane, you will never read every one of these contracts. And Delane just looking at him going, watch me. And she did. She just was determined to know it and to own it. And we used to laugh at board prep meetings when charter school approvals would come up and I would hear her from far away, bring me their charter. I thought, oh God, they're in trouble, but she studied and she learned and she did it oh so well. And like everyone said, she was a storyteller beyond, she could wrap it up and she could tell a story like nobody's business. She could bring up, as you heard from everyone, more poems, more songs, more stories. They would just come from a well within, and she could tell them like very few. And it was funny, Paula was talking about talking points because we've all had that opportunity to write a few. And I can remember Don Kairat, who worked here. He was standing in the back with me and Delane was giving his speech. And all of a sudden he goes, oh, she used one of my lines. I think he had written the whole speech and she was, and I said, yeah, enjoy it because it probably won't happen again. So, but she was just so gifted at that. And people are right, you know, poor Dina had the job, I was going to say the job from hell, trying to get us from one place to another in all 58 counties. And I really learned the state well, along with Jeff Pingree, her CHP office. The three of us traveled up and down the state. I know Naja has her own set of stories. I certainly have mine. She loved, I think, more than anything, being in schools, talking with students and being part of that. But what was the funniest thing is we'd go in, you know, Delane, they'd introduce Delane, she'd talk a little bit, and Jeff would be over here and she would always introduce Jeff. This is, you know, this is Jeff, my CHP officer, blah, blah, blah. Any questions? Does he have a gun? It was always the first question. And the second one was, can we see it? You know, so, it was so funny. And we traveled and got to see the country. And maybe what you don't know is Delane's love of graveyards. I have seen more graveyards in 58 counties of this state than you would ever think. She used to, we'd get into town and maybe if there was an hour or two, she'd go, let's check it out. And she would say, because there are stories here. And we would walk along and we would read headstones and we would talk about what ifs and whatever. And Jeff would roll his eyes. And the only thing we knew more than graveyards was Starbucks. Because trust me, he made sure we knew where everyone was so that we could get coffee. I'm happy to say, I could tell you and I could talk all day about our adventures with Delane, but suffice it to say, I'll always be grateful to her for leading the way to building a better place, a better world, and the opportunities she helped us afford for all children around the state. And because of her, one of the greatest gifts Delane gave me was the opportunity to make friends. And really make friends with so many people here in this room and across the state. Just because of her, we did and learned and just had so much together. I miss her like crazy. I do, especially right now, because I miss talking about elections and policies and how to get more women elected. They were great conversations. But I hear her. She is the voice in my head. Hey, kid, vote early, vote often. Yeah, she always said it and always meant it. She loved us. She loved all of you who worked here. She gave it her all and taught us to do the same. So with that, I just say, you know, you always want to leave the place better than when you came in, and Delane Easton did that. So thank you, Dina.
Thanks, Camille. Thanks to all the wonderful stories. Due to time, we will forego the open sharing, but we encourage you to share with each other in the lobby when we have breakfast out there. And I just want to thank again State Superintendent Thurmond for hosting this event, and for Jack and Tom for sharing, and for everyone sharing. And also want to thank the initiatives team and the communications team and my boss, Elizabeth Sanders, just for all their help in putting everything together. So thank you. And I'm going to turn it back to Tony for closing remarks.
Thank you, Dina, Jenna, and all the staff who helped to put all of this together today. Thank you to all of you who shared a story or a memory about Delane. Clearly, she poured a lot into everyone, and it really showed in the wonderful testimony from today. Thank you all for bringing humor to this conversation. It allows us to remember Delane with memories and feeling and emotion, and we thank you for that. We thank Delane for the foundation that she led. It's so ironic to hear so many of the issues that were talked about today in some ways, we're still talking about them and still fighting through them. And there's still so many challenges, but she laid an incredible foundation for us to work on. So please continue to celebrate her life and her memory. Please continue to be a part of her important legacy. And if you can, join us on January the 13th as we have the gala, the banquet to celebrate the Teachers of the Year. As I mentioned, that's the last time that we had the chance to celebrate Delane and for her to be recognized for the program that she created and to have a few remarks. And it seems to me that it would be fitting for us to continue to celebrate her through the Teacher of the Year program. So we make an invitation for you. Again, thank you. And as I said, this work is challenging, but it is the most rewarding opportunity to serve kids. And so let us all be like Delane Easton and continue to keep young people as our focus as we move forward in honoring her legacy and serving the nearly 6 million students in our state. Thank you so much, and continue to enjoy the fellowship together and sharing stories about Delane Easton. Thank you.